The city is one of humanity's greatest inventions. We built safe fortresses of concrete, steel, and glass, believing them to be far removed from jungles and savagery. But between 1939 and 1945, this concept was utterly shattered. In those 6 years, the city ceased to be a sanctuary. Streets became trenches, living rooms became bunkers, and the sky? The sky became a passageway for death. Hello everyone, welcome to your channel name. Today we're not talking about generals' games on maps, nor politicians' bargaining chips at the negotiating table. We're talking about the city. We'll take you back to 1939-1945, into those cities consumed by war. We'll listen to the sounds of air raids in London subway stations, experience hunger in the icy wilderness of Leningrad, and witness the collapse of an empire amidst the ruins of Berlin. On September 1st, 1939, Germany invaded Poland. 2 days later, Britain and France declared war on Germany. For ordinary citizens at the time, the first sign of war was not the sound of gunfire, but darkness. British Foreign Secretary Edward Grey famously remarked during World War I, "The lights are going out all over Europe." More than 2 decades later, in World War II, this statement became a physical reality. Blackout became the norm in cities across all participating nations.
Imagine you live in London, Berlin, or Chongqing. After nightfall, the city is plunged into absolute darkness. Streetlights go out, and car headlights must be covered with special shades, allowing only a faint glow. Every household must draw heavy black curtains, and if even a tiny light accidentally shines through, an ARP warden will immediately yell in the street, "Turn off that damn light." Why? Because high in the sky, enemy bombers are searching for targets. In an era without GPS and advanced radar navigation, the city's light sources are the perfect bullseye. This war completely changed the relationship between humanity and the city. Before, we feared the beasts of the dark. Now, we fear the light. The city entered a 6-year period of darkness.
Our first stop was London in 1940. Hitler had swept across continental Europe, and France had surrendered. Now, Nazi Germany aimed its guns at the last obstacle, Britain. Hitler's plan was simple. Before landing in Britain, the Royal Air Force had to be destroyed and the will to resist broken. Thus, the Blitz began. Starting on September 7, 1940, London experienced a first large-scale sustained bombing of a megacity in human history. Note my use of the word sustainable. The Luftwaffe bombed London for 57 consecutive nights. Visuals. Real footage of a nighttime bombing raid, with searchlights crisscrossing the sky and anti-aircraft fire exploding like fireworks. Initially, the British government prohibited people from using the subway as bomb shelters, fearing it would disrupt traffic and create a sense of defeatism, with people refusing to come out. But survival is a human instinct. When the bombs fell, tens of thousands of Londoners bought tickets, rushed into the subway stations, and refused to leave. Finally, the government compromised. London's subway stations became the world's largest underground bedrooms. It's a surreal scene. Piccadilly Circus and Liverpool street stations, normally bustling hubs, are now crammed with people from all walks of life. There are bankers in their pajamas, housewives with babies, homeless people, and artists. They spread blankets between the tracks. The air is thick with the smells of sweat, urine, disinfectant, and that lingering, musty smell of dust.
But what's most astonishing isn't the fear, but the order. A miniature social structure even formed within these subway stations. People shared sandwiches, someone played the accordion, and there were even mobile libraries lending books to refugees. There's a famous story. An American journalist interviewed an elderly woman in London who had just crawled out of a bombed-out house, asking, "What are you going to do now?" The woman dusted herself off and said, "I think I'll make myself a cup of tea first." This is the famous "Keep calm and carry on." It wasn't just a slogan. It was Londoners' only weapon against the Nazi psychological warfare of terror. If you can't kill me, I'll just live my life as usual.
However, towards the end of the war, in 1944, an even more terrifying sound emerged. Before, it was the bombers. People could still hear the buzzing of their aircraft. But then, the Germans invented the V-1 flying bomb, which Londoners called the doodlebug, a buzzing sound like an insect. The V-1's terror lay in its sound mechanism. It was equipped with a pulse jet engine, emitting a loud, motorcycle-like put-put-put sound. When this sound rang out overhead, everyone held their breath. But the most terrifying moment was when the sound stopped. Because the V-1 was designed so that if the engine shut down, the missile would dive. So as long as you could still hear the sound, you were safe. Once the sound disappeared, a deathly silence descended, meaning it would explode somewhere nearby within 10 seconds. London lost 30,000 citizens and over 1 million homes in the war. The city's face was forever changed. Today, if you see a row of Victorian houses interspersed with a modern 1960s building on the streets of London, it's usually a scar left by a bomb. London held on, proving that a city is not merely a collection of buildings, but a bastion of the human spirit. But not every city is as fortunate as London. On the other side of the European continent, a city is experiencing a torment 100 times more brutal than bombing: hunger.
If anything is more terrifying than death, it is a slow death. On September 8, 1941, Nazi Germany's Army Group North cut off Leningrad's last land route to the outside world. Hitler issued a cold order. Leningrad's surrender would not be accepted. His goal was not occupation, but to wipe the city off the map. The siege officially began. This siege lasted 872 days.
For the citizens of Leningrad, the greatest enemies were not German shells, but hunger and bitter cold. The winter of 1941 was one of the coldest in Russian history, with temperatures plummeting to -40 degrees Celsius. The city had no heating, no electricity, and all the water pipes had frozen and burst. People had to break the ice in the frozen Neva River to get water. But the most desperate situation was food. During the most difficult period of the siege, from November to December 1941, Leningrad's rationing system was extremely harsh. Workers received a daily bread ration of 250 grams, while children and the elderly received only 125 grams. What does 125 grams of bread mean? It's roughly 2 thin slices of toast. And it wasn't even real bread. Due to flour shortages, bakers mixed in sawdust, cottonseed cake, and even cellulose from wallpaper. This dark, rock-hard lump was an adult's entire day's energy source. People began eating anything edible. They boiled leather belts, ate the paste from the library because it was made from potato starch, and ate their pets. In the end, there wasn't a single cat, a single dog, or even a single rat in the city. In this history, one little girl's name is forever remembered: Tanya Savicheva. She was only 11 years old at the time. Tanya left behind a small diary containing only a few short lines, yet recording the destruction of a family. Each page is a date of death. Zhenya died on December 28th at 12 noon. Grandma died on January 25th at 3 p.m. Loka died on March 17th. Uncle Vasya died on April 13th. Mother died on May 13th at 7:30 a.m. The last page of the diary reads, "The Savicheva family is all dead. Only Tanya remains." Tanya was eventually rescued, but due to prolonged malnutrition, she did not survive the war and died 2 years later in the orphanage. Her diary later became evidence used in the Nuremberg trials to indict Nazi crimes. On the streets of Leningrad, death became so commonplace that people no longer felt fear, only numbness. Bodies were wrapped in sheets, dragged by sleds,
and piled up in the Piskalev cemetery. Because the ground was frozen too hard to dig graves, people had to use explosives to blast open the permafrost for mass burial.
Even in this hellish state, Leningrad did not surrender. The only hope came from Lake Ladoga. When the lake froze, the Soviet Red Army carved a perilous supply route across the ice, known as the Road of Life. Trucks braved German Luftwaffe bombing raids, traversing the ice that threatened to break at any moment to bring in food and evacuate women and children. Moreover, in this dying city, music still existed. On August 9, 1942, Dmitri Shostakovich's Symphony No. 7, also known as the Leningrad Symphony, premiered in this besieged city.
This was an incredible performance. The orchestra's conductor, Karl Eliasberg, had gone to great lengths to gather the musicians. Most of the original musicians had starved to death. The surviving musicians were too weak to play their instruments. Some even fainted during rehearsals. On the day of the performance, to prevent the concert hall from being bombed, the Soviet Army launched a fierce artillery barrage to suppress German fire. The broadcast tower amplified the concert throughout the city, even broadcasting it over massive loudspeakers towards German positions. For the people of Leningrad, this was more than just music. It was proof that they were alive, a roar against death.
On January 27, 1944, the siege was finally lifted. The city paid a terrible price. Approximately 600,000 to 1 million civilians died from starvation and bombing. This number exceeds the combined death toll of the United States and Britain throughout World War II. Leningrad showed the world the limits of human endurance. It was a city built on bones, and also a monument to willpower.
London showed resilience. Leningrad showed patience. But the wheels of war kept turning, crushing more cities. In the east, a city resisted alone in the fog for 5 years. In Central Europe, a city launched a doomed but tragic uprising. And Berlin, the instigator of it all, would eventually face its own doom. This is Warsaw today, the capital of Poland, beautiful and vibrant. But in January 1945, when the Soviet Army entered, they saw not a city, but a lunar surface. Hitler harbored a particular hatred for Warsaw. He once ordered, Warsaw should not merely be occupied, it must be wiped off the face of the earth. Warsaw experienced 2 deaths. The first was the 1943 Ghetto Uprising, a desperate cry. The second was the Warsaw Uprising of 1944, a tragic epic. August 1st, 1944, 5 p.m., codenamed W Hour. The Warsaw Underground Resistance, the Polish Home Army, decided to liberate their capital before the Soviet Army arrived. Initially, they were full of hope. Polish flags filled the streets. People believed freedom was within reach. But they were wrong. The Soviet Army across the river suddenly halted its advance, watching coldly. Meanwhile, the German army deployed its most brutal troops to suppress the rebellion. The battle lasted 63 days, and during those 63 days, the battlefield of the city shifted underground to the sewers. Imagine this. This wasn't a spacious, modern drainage system. These were 19th century red brick pipes, often less than a meter in diameter. Flowing within were the city's excrement, chemical wastewater, and the liquid from rotting corpses. The stench was not only unbearable, but also toxic. The methane gas could suffocate anyone at any moment. But this became the insurgents' only transportation network. Thousands upon thousands of soldiers, nurses, and messengers crawled for kilometers through the dark, filthy water. They had to stay inside for hours, even days. When the Germans discovered them, they would throw grenades into the manhole covers or pour in poison gas. The girl in this photograph has just experienced the hell described in Dante's Divine Comedy. In the sewers, many went mad, many got lost, and remained forever in that dark labyrinth. When the uprising ultimately failed,
Hitler issued the final order for destruction. German engineers, like demolition crews, systematically planted explosives, street by street, house by house. They destroyed libraries, palaces, and churches. By the end of the war, 85% of Warsaw's buildings were destroyed. This wasn't collateral damage, it was deliberate murder. The city was effectively dead. But the people of Warsaw were as resilient as the bricks in their buildings. After the war, they made a remarkable decision, not to rebuild elsewhere, but to restore the old town brick by brick, using the original bricks and following 18th century paintings, right on the ruins. Every brick you touch in Warsaw's old town today carries the scent of gunpowder from 1944. Now, let's shift our gaze eastward, across 7,000 kilometers, to Chongqing, China's wartime capital. If European cities are jungles of reinforced concrete, then Chongqing in the 1940s was a city built on cliffs, using bamboo, wood, and rock. It lacked London's advanced subway system and radar network. Here, there was only fog and towering mountains. From 1938 to 1943, Japan carried out a 5.5-year-long indiscriminate bombing campaign against Chongqing. Note the word indiscriminate. The Japanese army's targets were not military facilities, but civilian areas. They used incendiary bombs extensively because they knew that most of Chongqing's houses were wooden structures. In that era, life for the citizens of Chongqing was divided into two seasons, the foggy season and the bombing season. Autumn and winter were foggy, making it difficult to see Japanese planes, allowing people a brief respite. In spring and summer, when the fog lifted, death descended from the sky. To survive, the people of Chongqing hollowed out an entire mountain. Chongqing itself is a city built on rock. The citizens, using their bare hands and explosives, carved one of the world's largest air raid shelter systems into the solid rock. But this way of life came with enormous risks. On June 5, 1941, tragedy struck. This was the infamous June 5th Tunnel Massacre. That night, the Japanese launched a surprise attack. Air raid sirens blared for 5 hours. The Jiaochengkou Tunnel was overwhelmed with people, far exceeding its designed capacity. Due to chaotic management, the gates were locked and the ventilation system failed. Oxygen slowly ran out. It wasn't the tearing of bombs. It was silent suffocation. People struggled, pushed, and finally collapsed in the darkness. Oil lamps on the walls went out due to lack of oxygen, and darkness swallowed everything. It is estimated that thousands suffocated to death that night. When the gates were opened the next day, the streets were piled high with corpses, already bloated from the high temperatures. This was one of the deadliest single incidents of urban civilian casualties during World War II. But did Chongqing collapse? No. A foreign journalist once described this scene. The air raid sirens had just lifted, firefighters were still battling the blazes, and on the nearby ruins, a noodle vendor had already set up his pot, while citizens sat nonchalantly on the rubble eating their noodles. This spirit is known as the more it's bombed, the stronger it becomes. This isn't a propaganda slogan, it's a way of life. Since I can't stop the bombs from falling, I'll never let you see me cry. Chongqing, this fortress shrouded in mist, with its stubbornness, preserved the last vestige of dignity on the eastern battlefield. In the end, we must return to the source of all evil. As the saying goes, you reap what you sow. Or, in the words of Air Marshal Harris, they sowed the wind, and now they will reap the storm. In April 1945, the wheels of war rolled back into the heart of Germany, Berlin. This was no longer a story of air raids. It was a story of street fighting in a modern metropolis, the Third Reich's Ragnarok. Berlin had gone mad. Hitler, hiding in his Führer bunker beneath the Reich Chancellery Gardens, moved his now defunct army across a map. On the surface, the city was no longer defended by the elite Wehrmacht, but by the Volkssturm, People Storm. Who were they?
They were white-haired old men and Hitler youth boys whose voices hadn't yet broken. Looking at historical footage, you see children in ill-fitting helmets and overcoats, their eyes gleaming with a mixture of fanaticism and fear. They were told to fight to the last breath against the Soviet T-34 tank onslaught.
The fighting was exceptionally fierce. Even the Berlin Zoo became a battlefield. It was a surreal scene. Massive concrete anti-aircraft towers were firing, while nearby, terrified ostriches and monkeys, their cages destroyed, ran wildly through the burning streets, brushing past Soviet soldiers. On April 30th, Hitler committed suicide, but the killing did not stop. The Soviet Red Army, fueled by the vengeful fury accumulated from their march from Stalingrad, stormed subway stations and basements one by one.
On May 2, 1945, Berlin's garrison commander, Weidling, surrendered. Berlin at this time was a ruin. Not a single building remained intact. The streets were piled 2 meters high with rubble. The once invincible Nazi capital had become a vast open-air graveyard. Women here suffered horrific misery. Civilians lost everything. This was the ultimate price paid by those who waged war. It destroyed not only others, but also themselves.
The Germans call this moment Stunde Null, 0 hour. Time resets to 0, history resets to 0, and everything begins anew from the ruins.
From 1939 to 1945, tens of thousands of cities were engulfed in war. Today, we've only discussed a few representative examples. There was Hiroshima and Nagasaki, instantly vaporized by atomic bombs, Nanjing, which suffered a massacre, Stalingrad, where street fighting was brutal, and Tokyo, leveled by incendiary bombs.
Today, as we walk through these cities, sipping coffee, scrolling through our phones, and enjoying the convenience of air conditioning and subways, we easily forget that every inch of the land beneath our feet was once soaked in blood. Every old building around us has likely witnessed life and death. Cities are not merely piles of steel and concrete, they are containers of human civilization. In war, these containers were shattered. But what is even more astonishing is that humanity always manages to repair them. St. Paul's Cathedral in London still stands. The Royal Palace in Warsaw remains magnificent, and the hot pot in Chongqing still steams with warmth.
We look back at this history not to harbor hatred, nor to glorify the grandeur of war, but to remember how vulnerable and how resilient humanity is when the cloak of civilization is stripped away, when cities become battlefields. May our cities forever need only to contend with the elements, and never again with artillery fire. Thank you for watching the Wartime series. If you enjoyed this in-depth historical narrative, please like, subscribe, and tell me in the comments whether your city holds any untold wartime memories. See you next time.